Shalom. Today we are about to discuss prophecies that indicate that the lost 10 tribes are to be found amongst Western peoples. We are going to begin with the prophecies of Abraham. Abraham was the first Hebrew. Just to remind you, the lost 10 tribes are Israelite tribes, that is 10 out of the original 12 tribes, who were exiled by the Assyrians, lost consciousness of their ancestry, and whose identification has been lost to history. It's been lost to the general awareness of the public, and they themselves are not aware and do not know where they came from and who they are. And we, through the Bible and through secular sources and rabbinical sources and a great deal of research, have located them amongst Western nations. Now, we are not the first people who have come up with this idea. It's been well known for quite some time. In fact, it has been well known for a great deal of time, for centuries. But we did find additional information which confirms the identification, and we also confirmed the thoughts that others had on the subject. We went back over their sources and we found new sources, and we checked out the sources according to the Hebrew originals of the biblical text. So we did quite a bit on our own, and we built up on what others had already done, and we came up with the conclusion that lost 10 tribes indeed are amongst Western people. So we're not saying that everyone in the Western nations are Israelites. We think that is where the lost 10 tribes are. That is where they gave expression to their historical ancestry. And that is where, according to biblical prophecy, they will return from or reassert their identity from, and also the nations amongst whom they live, the countries wherein they dwell, will also be included, according to different sources, in the greater land of Israel in the end times. This might be hard to comprehend, but that is what prophecy indicates, and their specific regions are expressly mentioned. So what we can't do any more than we're doing, we can put the facts before the public, give you the information as we understand it, and you can judge for yourself, because it's worth knowing. It's worth considering, it's worth taking into consideration, it's worth checking up on. It's also worth supporting us if you think we are on the right track, because we need support. And this subject needs to be examined and confirmed and brought to the public consciousness. So, as we said, we are beginning with the prophecies concerning the lost 10 tribes of Israel, concerning Israelites in the end times, and we are beginning with the story of Abraham. Abraham was the first Hebrew. God told Abraham to get up out of his land. He originally dwelt in a place called Ur-Kasdim, usually assumed to be Ur of Asuma, which was in southern Mesopotamia, southern Iraq of today, which was once much fertile, once more prosperous than it is at present. It was the beginning of civilization, was in that region, as according to archaeological findings, and that is where Abraham is assumed to have come from. Other schools of thought say that the area that Abraham originated from was another place named Ur, which was somewhat to the north of Syria. For our purposes, it does not really matter. It's an academic point or a point for a different field of study. Abraham was told to get up from the land where he was and to go to the land that God would show unto him. And he was promised that that land, the new land that he was shown, the land of Canaan, would be given unto him and to his seed, as it says. And the Lord appeared unto Abraham. Abraham was originally called Abraham, and said, unto your seed will I give this land. And he built an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him. God appeared unto him and gave him the promise of the land. Now, we are going to show that the blessings to Abraham, they concern becoming a great and mighty nation, having kings of nations come out of him, of several nations at one and the same time, of being exceedingly numerous, a great and mighty nation, exceedingly populous, with a great number of people at an international level. In other words, one of the major ethnic entities of the world would emerge from Abraham. Also, the seed, the promises to Abraham would pass through Isaac, pass on to Jacob. They would go down in a straight line, genealogical continuum from father to son. But on the way had other sons, and they too would receive blessings. For instance, Ishmael became the forefather of the Arabs, or at least an important component amongst the Arabs, and Ishmael in biblical thought came to represent the Arabs in general, and after that the forces of Islam. And these are all considerations to be taken into consideration. But at present we are talking about the prophecies as given to Abraham, as God wanted them to be given and to pass on to son, that is eventually devolving, coming unto the Israelite nations. And from these blessings we can see what happened. We can see how these blessings came to fruition amongst people whom we identify as descendants of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. So as we said, Abraham was promised to become a great and mighty nation, to be exceedingly populous on an international level, to have kings and peoples come out of him, also to possess the thoroughfares, the gateways of his enemies, strategic places all over the earth, of those who are potentially antagonistic to him, of those who hate him, and of his enemies. And also he was promised the land, and he was also had obligations to believe in God, to keep the law and to practice circumcision. But we see a division in the promises. The promise to possess the land apparently is connected with circumcision. It is connected with keeping the law and of believing in God and everything which is connected to that. Whereas the other promises to become a great and mighty nation, to be powerful and to bring a blessing upon the peoples of the earth, were to be, as we see, ultimately were to be unconditional. In other words, there was a division in the promises. And we'll go into this in more detail, but at all events there was to be a division in the promises, and this division, according to our understanding, foreshadowed the division of the Israelite nation. The Israelite nation was destined to divide into two different sections. It's to be Judah, the Jews on one side, and the 10 tribes on the other. The 10 tribes would not know who they were, they would have forgotten their entity. Nevertheless, the blessings, or a portion of the blessings, would be fulfilled through them, and also the international task that was placed upon them would be also, at least in part, fulfilled through them, and they had to become a source of blessing to the other peoples of the earth, and to enhance or to instill a sense of justice and judgment amongst the nations of the earth, and they have done this, at least to some degree. And in the end times, the two sections of the Israelite nation, Judah on one hand, and the 10 tribes the other, will reunite, and the two aspects of the blessings will once again come into play. So that is what we have, and we'll go through the sources, and you'll see for yourself. And it's worth listening to, paying attention to it, because it's true, and we see it played out. We see these things come into force, become affected in history and in contemporary events. After that, once again, now in chapter 13 of Genesis, Abraham is again given a promise concerning the land, where it says from chapter 13, verse 14 onwards, the Lord said unto Abraham, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For the land which you see, to you will I give it, and to your seed forever. And I will make your seed, that is your offspring, your descendants, as the dust of the earth. And I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, so shall your seed also be numbered. Arise, walk in the land, in the length of it and the breadth of it, for I will give it unto you. Again we find later on a portion of the blessing is repeated in chapter 15. It says, behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, chapter 15, verse 4 onwards. Verse 5, and he brought him forth abroad, and he said, look now toward the heaven, and tell the stars, if you be able to number them. And he said unto him, so shall your seed be, so shall your offspring be, as numerous as the stars. And he believed in God, and he counted unto him for righteousness. And again we find Abraham having a vision, and he was told that the Lord, in chapter 15, verse 18, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto your seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates, the Canaanites and the Kenizzites and the Cadmonites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Rephaim and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Girgashites and the Jebusites, all those peoples who at the time of Abraham were dwelling in the land of all of them would be given unto the seed of Abraham. And that too was part of the promise. Chapter 17, verse 13. And Abraham fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. Neither shall your name any more be called Abraham, but your name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you, and your seed after you in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto you and to your seed after you. And I'll give unto you and to your seed after you the land wherein you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So here too we have a link between the promise of the land and God being the God that is recognized as God by the Israelite nations. So two aspects of the blessing were concomitant. One was dependent on the other, one was connected with the other. Chapter 17, verses 9 onwards, they're given the covenant of circumcision. Abraham had to circumcise all of his household, including his offspring and his servants who belonged to him, and the males had to circumcise all of them. And this too is associated with the covenant, the promise of inheriting the land and doing what has to be done. Abraham had another son, Ishmael. Abraham wanted Ishmael also to receive a blessing, so God promised him that Ishmael would also be great, but the promise would go to Isaac. Isaac would be the name of the son that Sarah, previously known as Sarai, would bear unto him, as it says. God said unto Abraham, as for Sarah your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be, and I will bless her and give you a son also of her. I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples shall be of her. And he goes on. And God said, verse 19 onwards, and God said, Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, indeed, and you shall call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. It goes on, verse 21, but my covenant will I establish with Isaac, with the Sarah which shall bear unto you at this time in the next year. We have in chapter 18, God speaks of the promise that he had given unto Abraham, of what was expected of Abraham, as we find in chapter 18, verse 19 onwards. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of. So we see here a different point, another point which is worth noting and which will be repeated later. Abraham was to become a great and mighty nation in order that he do justice and judgment, and then too he would be further blessed. In other words, becoming a great and mighty nation was not only a reward for what Abraham had done or how he had lived, but how he would live in the future, and how he would fulfill the task which God had placed upon him, placed upon his descendants, which was to do justice and judgment. And in order to enable them to do that on an international level, they would become a great and mighty nation. We can say that to some degree, becoming a great and mighty nation was a prerequisite, a precondition, foregone preparation to enable Abraham to do justice and judgment on an international level. And that is what descendants of Abraham, the Western peoples whom we identify as being belonging to the Western tribes, have. As we said, we identify the lost 10 tribes as being amongst Western nations. We identify them as the nations, as being in the nations, amongst the nations of Finland, of Sweden, of Norway, of Denmark, of the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Switzerland, England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland, the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. All those nations have descendants of the Israelites amongst them. The English-speaking peoples are especially blessed because they were the ones in which the tribes of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh were to become predominant, and we will see later that even though all of the tribes received a portion of the blessing or individual aspects of the blessing in its full expression would go through Joseph. And Joseph are peoples who settle amongst the English-speaking nations, and they, together with the others, have done good in the world. They have uplifted the other peoples of the earth. They have instilled the concepts of justice, of civilization, of dignity, human dignity amongst the peoples. They have brought about reforms in agriculture. They have helped other people, not in the 60s and after the 60s. The USA, that is not that long ago, was responsible for the Green Revolution, which incidentally scientists of Scandinavian origin were also prominent in developing rice and crops that were drought-resistant, disease-resistant, that were much easier to handle, which were much more economical and suitable to the Eastern nations that depended upon them. And as a result of this, there was a revolution in world agriculture, and hundreds of millions of people are now alive thanks to these efforts. And people forget this, but it wasn't that long ago. It was in our time. And if you want more details, you can look it up on the internet. There's quite a bit of information available to those who are interested concerning it, and it did happen. It's an incontrovertible fact that this is what these peoples did, this is what was carried out, and many people are alive today as a result of it. And we're talking, by many people, we're talking about hundreds of millions, if not more. And this is just one example out of a great number. Relative to other nations, these peoples in these nations, they are not saints. They're not what we would call 100% righteous. Maybe some of what they did, a lot of what they did, may have even been motivated by self-interest. Maybe it was in their interest to do what they had done, what they did do. But nevertheless, a certain degree of altruism was also present and is still there. And they did it and others did not do it. Because according to our research, they are the ones who are descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. They are the descendants of Israel. And they are the ones who received the blessing. They are also the ones who received the obligation to do what was done. And they did it. Following these things, Isaac was born. When Isaac had grown a little, or somewhat, there are debates about exactly how old Isaac was when the following events took place. Some say he was already a grown man. At all events, Abraham was suddenly commanded to take Isaac and to take him up to a mountain and to sacrifice him to God. This is what he did. He took a knife, prepared a knife, and he took Isaac and he went up with wood to light a fire. And the intention was to kill Isaac and then to burn up his body as a sacrifice. But at the last minute, his hand was stopped by an angel. And then he was promised that consequent on him having been prepared to fulfill the will of God and to do what he had been commanded to do, he would be blessed, the blessings would be confirmed in him, and not only that, but henceforth the blessings would be unconditional. That all of the blessings would be unconditional, apart from the blessing concerning the land, apart from the condition concerning the land, which apparently would still be contingent upon believing in God, keeping the commandments, and maintaining the covenant of circumcision. Following this, God promised Abraham, he said, chapter 22, verse 16, onwards. By myself have I sworn, by myself, in other words, unconditionally, by myself have I sworn, says the Lord. By myself have I sworn, says the Lord. Because you have done this thing, I have not withheld your son, your only son. Then in blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your seed as the stars of the heaven, as the sand which is upon the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gates of your enemies. Gates of your enemies means strategic thoroughfares. That is important areas of the world which have a strategic importance and which give the opportunity of dominating potentially antagonistic enemies. And the British did this. First the British did this. They had the Suez Canal, they had the Straits of Gibraltar, they had Malta, they had Cyprus, they had Singapore, they had Hong Kong. They everywhere throughout the world where there was an important area, they had Heligoland in northern Germany. Wherever there was an important place, the British had control of it in the times of the British Empire. After them, the Americans have continued this policy. The Americans now have bases, strategic bases all over the earth, islands and places and rights of ingress and egress and airfields, and whatever you want is placed in strategic locations throughout the earth. They have followed the pattern set by the British Empire, and in many ways the British and the Americans on an international level, at a geopolitical level, one continuum, one straight continuation in their policies and in their attitudes and in their establishment of bases and places of advantage throughout the world, wherever they had a reason to need or potentially have a need to dominate the region. They asserted their presence and have established a presence in such places. And these are what are called the gates of the enemies, or the gates of those that hate them. And the blessing to Abraham, the gates of his enemies. And that they're also extremely numerous. As the sands of the seas and the stars of the heaven, the Anglo-Saxon peoples number hundreds of millions of people. And they also influence hundreds of millions more. And they are an ethnic group amongst the peoples of the earth. They are a people, a major people. And so this is a blessing which was given unto them. And it also says in verse 18, chapter 22, verse 18, and in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have heard my voice. So this was a blessing, and this blessing was given as a result of Abraham having been prepared to carry out the commandment given unto him. But we have already seen that the distinction in this blessing between possessing the land and the other aspects of the blessing, becoming a great and mighty nation. The division between these blessings had been pre-adumbrated from the very beginning. It had been hinted or indicated that the one would be contingent upon believing in the one God, keeping the commandments, keeping circumcision, and the other would be contingent upon fulfilling the purpose for which they had been created concerning the nations of the earth. And when they could not carry out these two aspects of the blessings, as we have shown elsewhere, it would be decided that the nation should, at least for a portion of the history of mankind, what we call the exile, for the exile period, these two nations would be divided. Judah would take one aspect of the blessings, one aspect of the national tasks, that is to keep the Torah, keep the commandments, keep the law of circumcision, whereas Joseph, representing the 10 tribes, would bring to fruition the other aspects of the promises. Now, this might be difficult to conceive, but it's quite logical. It fits the biblical texts. And in future talks, this theme will be developed and will become even more clearer. But even so, if you look at the text we have read out and you consider them, it is also already there. It's already laid out quite clearly. May the Lord God of Israel bless you. Thank you.